Chapter 1. The Whisper of Roots. Part 1. Glendora awoke slowly each morning, as if the valley itself was reluctant to disturb the peace of the quiet village. The first light of dawn would creep gently over the eastern hills, touching the rooftops and winding paths with soft golden light. For Aldara, this peaceful moment felt like a promise. She often rose before the sun, relishing the calm, listening to the early bird songs and the faint rustling of leaves. Her cottage, a modest structure on the outskirts of Glendora, was surrounded by a garden of wild herbs and flowers that she tended with care. Aldara was known throughout the village as a healer, a role she had embraced early in life. Her mother had been a healer as well, and Aldara had spent much of her childhood learning the secrets of plants, roots, and the ways of the land. The work had been her mother's legacy, a practice that provided not only remedies, but a connection to something larger, a purpose that grounded Aldara and gave her a sense of belonging. But even as she had grown into the role, Aldara often felt a quiet restlessness, a feeling that her path was leading somewhere beyond Glendora, though she had no idea where or why. She never spoke of this to the villagers. Glendora was her home, and her place among them was as precious to her as her own heartbeat. Still, she sometimes felt the pull of the unknown, a call that whispered at the edges of her mind like a breeze from a distant shore. As the first light filtered through her garden, Aldara moved with practiced ease, gathering fresh herbs and blossoms. She was preparing remedies for the day, soothing balms for aches, teas to calm worried minds, and salves to heal cuts and bruises. She worked alone, her hands moving deftly through the familiar routines, but her thoughts drifted, lingering on memories of her mother. In the years since her mother's passing, Aldara had taken on the full responsibility of tending to the village's health and well-being. The people of Glendora trusted her, and she took their trust to heart, working tirelessly to ease their pain and heal their wounds. But sometimes, in the quiet hours of early morning, she felt the weight of that responsibility pressing down on her. It was a quiet, steady pressure, like the roots of an ancient tree, deep and unyielding. A glimpse into the past. In the early years of her training, Aldara's mother had guided her through the village gardens and forests, teaching her the names and uses of each plant. Her mother had a reverence for the land that she had instilled in Aldara, a belief that healing was a partnership with the earth, a trust and respect for the cycles of growth and decay. Every plant has a purpose, her mother would say, brushing her hand over a cluster of chamomile blossoms. Just as every person does, our role is not to force nature to heal, but to guide it, to listen to what it's telling us. These words had stayed with Aldara, shaping her approach to healing and guiding her even after her mother's voice had faded into memory. Now, when villagers came to her seeking relief, she treated not just their symptoms, but the root of their pain. And in return, the people of Glendora cared for her, each villager recognizing the depth of her dedication, her quiet sacrifices. There was Leor, a boy of 8, with a ready smile and a heart filled with curiosity. He often visited her cottage, fascinated by the array of herbs and potions. His mother had fallen ill some years ago, and Leor had become Aldara's unofficial assistant, eagerly helping her gather herbs and prepare teas. The boy had a gentle, calming effect on Aldara, a reminder of the joy and innocence she was helping to protect. And then there was Halim, an elderly man with failing sight, who relied on Aldara's remedies to ease his joints and allow him to walk to the village square each morning. Helene often recounted tales of the village's history, speaking of times before Aldara's birth, when Glendora had been even more isolated, nestled in the shadows of the hills, with little connection to the wider world. His stories were laced with wisdom, tales of resilience and survival, and Aldara found comfort in his presence. These were her people, her family, each one a thread in the tapestry of Glendora. She loved them fiercely, and it was that love that had guided her to embrace the path of the healer, to dedicate her life to the well-being of the village. But there were days when she longed for something more, something beyond the daily rhythms and rituals of Glendora. It was a feeling she could not name, a sense that her journey was meant to go further, to reach beyond the bounds of the valley. A summons from Elder Yoden. It was during one of these early morning rituals, as she prepared bundles of lavender and chamomile, that she noticed a figure approaching her cottage. The sight of Elder Yoden was unusual at this hour. He was a man of routine, rising at dawn, but rarely venturing out so early. The elder moved slowly, his gait steady but purposeful, his face lined with the wisdom and age that commanded respect throughout Glendora. Aldara straightened, wiping her hands on her apron as she stepped forward to greet him. She could sense a weight in his expression, a seriousness that seemed to settle into the lines of his face, making him look older, more solemn than usual. "Good morning, Elder Yoden," she greeted, inclining her head respectfully. "It's an honor to see you here." Yoden offered a faint smile, though his eyes remained thoughtful, studying her in a way that made Aldara feel as if he were seeing beyond her, into the depths of her heart. "Aldara," he said quietly, his voice as steady as the earth beneath their feet. "I have come to speak with you about a matter of great importance. There is something I have kept close, waiting for the right time, and I believe that time is now." Aldara felt her heart quicken, her curiosity piqued by the gravity in his tone. Yoden rarely spoke of secrets or hidden matters. He was a straightforward man, practical and grounded, and for him to say such words left no doubt that he was about to reveal something of great consequence. "Of course," she replied, her voice soft with reverence. "Please, come inside." She led him into her cottage, offering him a seat near the hearth. The room was filled with the earthy scent of drying herbs, a familiar fragrance that usually brought her comfort. But today, it seemed to take on a weight of its own, mingling with the elder's solemn presence. Once seated, Yoden took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "Aldara," he began, his voice low but resonant. "What I am about to tell you has been guarded by the elders of Glendora for generations. It is a prophecy, a story passed down through the ages, known only to those who have carried the responsibility of protecting our village." Aldara's gaze remained fixed on him, her heart thudding in her chest. She had heard whispers of prophecies, of legends that spoke of sacred lands and hidden powers, but she had always considered them to be stories, myths meant to entertain or inspire, not truths that could shape the course of her life. Yoden continued, his eyes fixed on hers, as if searching for something he hoped to find. "The prophecy speaks of a place called the Eternal Land, a realm where the elements of nature are in perfect harmony. It is said that this land holds a crystal, the heart's crystal, which embodies the balance of all living things. This crystal is a source of great power, a force of healing, of unity." Aldara listened in silence, her mind reeling with the weight of his words. The eternal land, the heart's crystal. These were names that stirred something deep within her, a spark of recognition she couldn't explain. She felt as though a door had been opened, a path revealed, leading her towards something both wondrous and terrifying. Yoden's gaze remained steady as he spoke. The prophecy also speaks of a time when the heart's crystal will be vulnerable, when forces of darkness will seek to claim its power for their own. And in that time, it is said that a guardian will rise, one with a pure heart, one who can bring balance and protect the crystal from those who would use it for destruction. Aldara felt a shiver run through her, the weight of the prophecy settling over her like a mantle. The words resonated in her mind, filling her with a sense of awe and fear. A guardian, one with a pure heart. Could Yoden possibly mean her? The elder's expression softened, his voice filled with a quiet certainty. Aldara, I believe that you are the one the prophecy speaks of. You have the strength, the compassion, and the connection to the land that this journey requires. I have watched you grow, seen the way you care for others, the way you respect the earth and its gifts. I believe you were meant to walk this path. Aldara's mind raced, her heart pounding as she tried to process his words. She had always felt a pull toward something greater, a sense that her life was leading her toward an unknown purpose. But to be the guardian of the heart's crystal, to leave Glendora, to journey into the unknown, to face dangers she couldn't even imagine. The thought was overwhelming. Elder Yoden, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I've only ever known Glendora, my life here as a healer. This journey, it feels too vast, too great. Yoden placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch steady and reassuring. None of us are ever truly ready for the paths that life sets before us. But you have been preparing for this all your life, even if you didn't know it. And I believe that the strength you seek is already within you. Trust in that strength, Aldara. Trust in the journey. Chapter 1. The Whisper of Roots. Part 2. Aldara sat in silence, her mind reeling with the enormity of Elder Yoden's words. She stared down at her hands, the familiar comfort of her cottage seeming suddenly distant, as if she were already halfway down the path he spoke of. The weight of his gaze, steady and full of trust, rested heavily on her shoulders. Part of her longed to retreat, to hide within the walls of Glendora, where life was steady and known. Yet the seed of curiosity and purpose he had planted in her heart began to unfurl, filling her with an undeniable restlessness. After a long silence, she looked up at Yoden, her voice soft but steady. Elder, if this journey is as dangerous as you say, and if there are forces that seek to corrupt the crystal, then what chance do I have? I'm just a healer. I'm not trained to fight darkness or face unknown forces. How could I possibly protect the crystal? Yoden's expression softened, his gaze filled with a mixture of wisdom and compassion. Strength is not always found in weapons or battle, Aldara. You have been entrusted with the knowledge of the land, the patience to heal, and the courage to bear others' burdens. These gifts are not small, nor are they powerless. It is precisely because you are a healer, because you carry compassion within you, that you have been chosen. Aldara felt a stirring in her chest, a sense of purpose that pushed back against her fear. She had always found strength in caring for others, in easing their pain, in being a steady presence in a world filled with hardship. Perhaps, she thought, this journey would require her to be that presence in ways she had never imagined. Still, she said quietly, it's difficult to imagine leaving Glendora, leaving the people I've spent my life helping. They rely on me, and I rely on them. What if I fail? What if I can't return? Yoden reached out, his hand resting on hers, his voice gentle but unwavering. Aldara, this journey is one only you can undertake. It's true that Glendora depends on you, but perhaps, in the process of seeking the Eternal Land, you will bring something back that will serve this village in ways far greater than we can imagine. He released her hand, leaning back as he continued, his voice growing softer, as if speaking to himself as much as to her. The land itself is a guide, a teacher. If you listen closely, if you trust in its wisdom, it will reveal the path to you. Remember, you will not be alone. The prophecy speaks of companions who will join you, of allies who will strengthen your resolve. Trust that the journey will bring those you need. Aldara took a deep breath, letting his words settle over her. She felt the echoes of his faith resonating within her, grounding her fears and giving her courage. She nodded slowly, a quiet resolve taking root in her heart. Then I will accept this journey, Elder. I will seek the Eternal Land, and I will protect the crystal. Yoden's face brightened with a gentle smile, his eyes gleaming with pride. You are braver than you know, Aldara. The village will be proud of you, and they will await your return. And know this, whatever trials you face, the strength of Glendora will be with you. This village has thrived for generations, and its spirit will guide you, even in the darkest places. Aldara rose from her seat, her heart steady, her mind still racing with questions, but now tempered by a sense of purpose. She felt as though her life had suddenly expanded, the world opening up before her like a vast, uncharted landscape, filled with wonders and dangers she had never dreamed of. Yoden watched her, a knowing glint in his eyes. Prepare yourself, Aldara. The journey will not be easy, but I believe you will find that you are stronger than you think. Trust in the path, and in yourself. A village farewell. As the news of her journey spread through Glendora, villagers began arriving at her cottage, each one bringing small offerings, a charm for protection, a bundle of dried herbs, a loaf of freshly baked bread. The people who had come to her seeking healing now stood before her, offering their gratitude, their well wishes, and their faith in her. Leor, the young boy who had become her unofficial assistant, appeared at her door, his eyes wide and brimming with tears. He held out a small, worn pouch filled with dried lavender and chamomile, his fingers trembling. For you, Aldara, he said, his voice a mere whisper, for when you need calm and courage. Aldara knelt, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Thank you, Leor. I will carry it with me and think of you whenever I need strength. She handed him a small bundle of herbs and whispered, Look after everyone here, all right? I'll need you to be strong. He nodded, his gaze filled with determination as he clutched the bundle. I promise, Aldara. I'll take care of them. As she rose, Harlan, the elderly man who had once told her tales of Glendora's past, approached her, his hands clasping hers tightly. You are the heart of this village, Aldara. Know that we will be with you. every step of the way. And when you return, you will bring light and peace with you. She felt a lump rise in her throat as she looked at the faces around her. People she had cared for, healed, and grown to love. They had been her world, her purpose, and leaving them filled her with a bittersweet ache. Yet as she looked into their eyes, she saw their faith in her, a faith that strengthened her resolve. The night before the journey. As the villagers departed, leaving her with quiet goodbyes and blessings, Aldara sat by the hearth, the warmth of the fire a comfort in the growing dusk. Her satchel lay ready beside her, filled with healing herbs, small vials of salves, and a worn journal in which she had recorded her knowledge of the plants and remedies she had learned over the years. She felt the familiar weight of her tools, her knowledge, her identity as a healer. And yet, tonight, they felt different, as if they were no longer just objects, but symbols of the person she had become, the person she was meant to be on this journey. A soft knock at the door drew her from her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Eodin standing there, his face gentle in the fading light. "I came to give you something," he said, holding out a small, intricately carved wooden box. "This has been passed down through generations of Glendora's elders. It is said to contain a blessing from the eternal land itself, a reminder that even in the darkest times, you carry a light within you." Aldara opened the box, her breath catching as she beheld the small crystal nestled within. It was no larger than her thumb, but it glowed with a soft, iridescent light, casting faint colors across the room. "It is beautiful," she whispered, feeling a warmth spread through her as she held the crystal. "Thank you, Elder. I will carry it with me as a reminder of Glendora, of all the people I hold dear." Eodin nodded, his gaze soft. "Remember, Aldara, the path you walk is not just for you, but for all those who seek peace and healing. You carry the spirit of this village with you, and no matter how far you go, you will never be alone." With a final solemn nod, Eodin took his leave, leaving Aldara alone with the crystal's gentle glow. She placed it carefully in her satchel, her heart filled with a quiet sense of strength and purpose. The night stretched before her, filled with the whispers of the unknown. Yet she felt no fear, only a steady resolve, a promise to herself and to the people she loved. Dreams of the eternal land. That night, Aldara lay beneath a sky filled with stars, the cool night air wrapping around her like a protective cloak. She closed her eyes, letting herself drift into the quiet embrace of sleep. Almost immediately, she found herself standing in a vast, shimmering landscape, unlike anything she had ever seen. She stood at the edge of a valley filled with silver grasses that swayed in an unseen breeze, their tips catching the light like scattered stars. In the distance, she saw mountains rising toward the sky, their peaks glowing with an ethereal light. Rivers wound through the landscape like ribbons of silver, their currents moving in harmony with the land, their waters clear and filled with a quiet, pulsing energy. And at the heart of the valley, she saw it, the heart's crystal. It was larger than she could have imagined, its surface smooth and faceted, its light pulsing with a gentle, steady rhythm that filled her with a profound sense of peace. She felt a pull toward it, an invitation that beckoned her to step forward, to become part of the land's eternal harmony. As she moved toward the crystal, she felt the presence of something ancient and wise, a force that seemed to surround her, to fill her with a sense of purpose and belonging. She knew in that moment that her journey was not simply about protection, but about embracing a truth that lay beyond her understanding, a truth that bound her to the land, to the crystal, to all living things. When she awoke, the memory of the dream lingered, filling her with a quiet certainty. She was ready. Chapter 2. The Journey Begins. Part 1. The morning of Aldara's departure dawned with a soft mist hanging over Glendora, cloaking the village in a silvery haze that made everything look ethereal, almost dreamlike. She stood at the edge of the village, her satchel packed and slung over her shoulder, the crystal Eodin had given her tucked safely inside. She wore a cloak of deep green, its color blending with the surrounding trees, and sturdy leather boots that would carry her over miles of rugged terrain. The villagers had gathered, standing in clusters along the path, watching her with a mixture of awe and sadness. Many held small tokens in their hands, a flower, a leaf, a woven bracelet, all quiet gestures of their love and support. As she looked out over the crowd, Aldara felt the weight of their gazes, the silent strength they offered her, and the warmth of their hopes resting on her shoulders like a mantle. Halin, the elderly man whose stories of Glendora had filled her childhood with wonder, stepped forward, his hands clasping hers tightly. "Remember, Aldara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the heart of this village. No matter where this journey takes you, know that we are with you, each of us carrying a part of you with us." She nodded, unable to find the words to express the gratitude swelling in her chest. She knew that her love for Glendora, for its people, would be the compass that guided her, a constant source of strength in whatever trials lay ahead. One by one, others approached her, offering whispered blessings and small gifts. Leor gave her a simple woven bracelet, its colors bright and cheerful. "For luck," he whispered, his eyes wide with both pride and sadness. "Thank you, Leor," she replied softly, placing the bracelet on her wrist. "I will wear it always." When everyone had said their goodbyes, Elder Eodin stepped forward, his gaze warm, yet filled with the gravity of the journey she was about to undertake. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her, steadying her spirit. "Aldara," he said, his voice low, "your journey will not be easy. You will face trials that may feel insurmountable, moments that will test the very core of who you are. But remember, your heart, your compassion, and your connection to the land are what make you strong. Trust in yourself, and trust in the guidance the land will offer." Aldara took a deep breath, nodding as his words settled within her. She looked out over the village one last time, her heart full, then turned and began walking down the narrow path that led away from Glendora into the forest that surrounded the valley. As the mist closed around her, she felt a strange mix of emotions: excitement, fear, sadness, and something deeper, a feeling that was both unfamiliar and comforting, like a song she had known in another life. The path wound through tall pines and ancient oaks, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the morning light into soft, dappled patches on the forest floor. The scent of pine needles and damp earth filled the air, grounding her, reminding her of the land she loved, the land she had vowed to protect. Each step felt like a small victory, a reminder of the resolve that had led her to accept this journey. Though she was leaving behind everything she knew, she felt the presence of Glendora with her, the strength of its people flowing through her veins. First, hints of the journey's trials. As the morning wore on, the mist gradually lifted, revealing more of the path ahead. Aldara walked steadily, her senses attuned to the sounds of the forest, the rustling of leaves, the calls of distant birds, the faint trickle of a hidden stream. She kept her hand near her satchel, her fingers occasionally brushing against the crystal Yoden had given her, as if to reassure herself of its presence. Her thoughts drifted to the prophecy, to the words Yoden had spoken. A guardian, one who would protect the heart's crystal from those who sought to use its power for their own ends. The idea felt surreal, like something out of the stories Hallen used to tell around the hearth on winter nights. Yet, as strange as it seemed, there was a part of her that had always felt this calling, this pull towards something beyond the familiar boundaries of Glendora. Hours passed as she walked, her steps steady, but her heart gradually growing heavier with the silence. Alone in the forest, the reality of her isolation settled over her. She had spent her life surrounded by people, by the comforting rhythms of village life. Now, with only the whispering trees and her own thoughts for company, she felt a pang of loneliness, a sense of vulnerability that she had never known before. As afternoon approached, she found herself reaching a small clearing, a spot where the trees opened up to reveal a pool of clear, sparkling water. Aldara felt a surge of relief, grateful for the chance to rest and replenish her supplies. She knelt by the water's edge, cupping her hands to drink, the coolness of the water refreshing her, grounding her in the present moment. A first encounter with mystery. Just as she was beginning to relax, a faint rustling in the undergrowth caught her attention. She froze, her senses sharpening, her heart pounding as she scanned the forest around her. At first, she saw nothing, only the shadows shifting among the trees, the flicker of sunlight on leaves. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of movement. A figure stepping into the clearing, his form partially obscured by a dark cloak. The man was tall and lean, his face hidden beneath the hood of his cloak. He moved with a quiet, graceful intensity, each step measured, his gaze fixed on her with an unsettling stillness. Aldara felt a flash of apprehension, her hand instinctively moving toward the dagger she carried at her waist. Though she had little experience with fighting, she knew enough to recognize a potential threat. The stranger stopped a few paces away, his gaze piercing as he looked at her. For a moment, they stood in silence, each assessing the other, the weight of the encounter hanging heavy in the air. Finally, the man spoke, his voice low and edged with something unreadable. "You are Aldara of Glendora, the healer, are you not?" Aldara hesitated, her mind racing with questions. How did he know her name? Why was he here? "Yes," she replied cautiously. "And who are you?" The man lifted his hood, revealing a face marked by sharp, angular features and a faint scar along his cheekbone. His dark eyes held a depth and intensity that unsettled her, as if he carried within him secrets and burdens that ran deeper than the roots of the oldest trees. "My name is Kian," he said simply, his gaze unwavering. "I, too, seek the heart's crystal." The words hit her like a gust of wind, stirring her unease into a full-blown storm. Another seeker, one who, like her, had come to seek the crystal and its power. But what were his intentions? Could she trust him? "What do you want with the crystal?" she asked, her voice steady but wary. Kian's expression remained unreadable, though there was a flicker of something, pain, perhaps, or regret, in his eyes. "That is my own business," he replied coolly. "But know this, I have no intention of letting anyone stand in my way. I have come this far alone, and I will not allow anything to deter me from my path." Aldara felt a surge of anger, her initial wariness giving way to indignation. "The heart's crystal is not something to be possessed or controlled," she said firmly. "It is a source of balance, of healing. If you seek it for power, you are no better than those who would harm it." Kian's gaze darkened, his expression hardening. "And who are you to judge my intentions?" he replied, his tone laced with bitterness. "You know nothing of my past, of the sacrifices I have made to reach this point." Aldara felt her resolve harden, a quiet, unshakable certainty filling her. "I may not know your past, Kian, but I know that the crystal is not something to be taken lightly. It is meant to be protected, not used." For a long moment, they stood in tense silence, the weight of their unspoken differences thickening the air between them. Aldara could feel the strength of his presence, his intensity, and yet she sensed something deeper, something wounded within him that he kept hidden behind a wall of stoicism and pride. Finally, Kian let out a sigh, his shoulders relaxing slightly, though his gaze remained guarded. "Perhaps we are not so different after all," he murmured, almost to himself. "But know this, I have no desire to harm the crystal. I seek it for my own reasons, reasons you would not understand." Aldara studied him, her anger softening into curiosity. She sensed that he was telling the truth, though there was much he was holding back, much he was unwilling to reveal. For reasons she couldn't explain, she felt a strange kinship with him, a sense that their paths were intertwined in ways neither of them fully understood. "Very well," she said quietly. "If you truly seek the crystal for a purpose other than power, then perhaps we can walk this path together. But know that I will not hesitate to stand against you if you stray from that purpose." Kian nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, though his eyes remained serious. "Agreed. And let me warn you, Aldara, I am not one to be easily swayed. I have my own path, and I will see it through to the end." With a final, lingering glance, he turned and began walking down the path, his steps quiet and sure. Aldara hesitated, feeling the weight of her choice settle over her, then followed him, her heart a mix of apprehension and curiosity. The journey had barely begun, and already she was finding herself drawn into mysteries and alliances she had not foreseen. Together they moved forward, the silence between them heavy with unspoken questions and guarded trust. And as they ventured deeper into the unknown, Aldara couldn't shake the feeling that their paths were leading them toward a destiny far greater than either of them could imagine. Chapter 2. The Journey Begins. Part 2. The path wound deeper into the forest, the air growing cooler as the canopy thickened overhead, casting shadows that danced across the forest floor. Aldara and Kian walked in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the tension between them simmering beneath the quiet. Aldara kept a careful distance from him, her senses attuned to every sound and movement, aware of the guardedness that still lay between them. They had been walking for several hours when Kian abruptly stopped, his hand raised in a silent gesture. Aldara froze, her eyes scanning the dense undergrowth around them, her heartbeat quickening. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched low, his gaze sharp as he studied the ground. "Tracks," he murmured, pointing to a faint set of footprints pressed into the damp earth. They were large, wider than a human foot, with deep impressions that hinted at a heavy weight. Aldara's pulse quickened as she knelt beside him, examining the tracks. "What kind of creature made these?" she asked, her voice hushed with apprehension. Kian's expression was unreadable, his gaze distant. "Something we'd best avoid if we can," he replied. "But it appears to be moving in the same direction we are." Aldara swallowed, a mixture of fear and resolve filling her. She knew the journey would be fraught with danger, but this was her first real encounter with the unknown. She glanced at Kian, noting the calm determination in his eyes. He had faced dangers before, she realized, dangers she could barely comprehend. Despite their differences, she found herself grateful for his presence, his quiet confidence a steadying force in the face of the unknown. They continued onward, moving with caution, their senses heightened as they followed the path through the dense woods. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. The air was thick with tension, as if the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down Aldara's spine. She stopped, her heart pounding, her hand moving instinctively to the dagger at her waist. Kian's hand was already on the hilt of his own weapon, his gaze fixed on a dark shape that moved through the shadows ahead. The creature emerged from the undergrowth, its massive form half hidden in the dim light. It was a wolf, but unlike any wolf Aldara had seen. Its fur was dark and matted, its eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. Scars crisscrossed its body, and its jaws were bared, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth. The creature's presence radiated a sense of menace, a dark energy that seemed to pulse through the air around it. Kian's voice was low, steady. "Stay back, Aldara. This one is dangerous." Aldara nodded, her hand tightening on her dagger as she took a step back. She could feel the creature's gaze on her, its eyes filled with an intelligence that was unsettling, as if it were assessing her, measuring her strength and resolve. The wolf let out a snarl, its muscles tensing as it prepared to lunge. Kian moved swiftly, positioning himself between Aldara and the creature, his blade drawn and ready. "Go!" he shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. "Get out of here!" But Aldara stood her ground, her heart pounding with fear and determination. She knew that running would leave Kian to face the creature alone, and despite their differences, she couldn't bring herself to abandon him. With a deep breath, she summoned the courage to speak. "I'm not leaving you. We face this together." Kian shot her a quick glance, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, but he said nothing, his focus returning to the wolf. The creature lunged, its powerful body surging forward with a speed that took Aldara's breath away. Kian moved with practiced precision, his blade flashing as he sidestepped the attack, narrowly avoiding the creature's jaws. Aldara watched, her heart in her throat, as Kian fought the wolf, his movements fluid and controlled. But she could see the strain in his face, the weight of his focus as he fought to keep the creature at bay. It was clear that the battle would not be easy, and she knew she couldn't stand idly by. Summoning her courage, Aldara reached into her satchel, her fingers brushing against a small vial of powder. a blend of calming herbs she had prepared for emergencies. She didn't know if it would work on a creature as fierce as this, but she had to try. "Kian!" she called, her voice steady despite her fear. "Distract it for a moment. I have an idea." Kian nodded, his gaze sharp as he maneuvered around the creature, drawing its attention away from her. Aldara moved quickly, uncorking the vial and sprinkling the powder into her hand. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, then blew the powder toward the wolf, praying it would reach the creature's nose. The powder drifted through the air, carried by a faint breeze, and for a moment, Aldara thought it had been in vain. But then, the wolf's movements slowed, its snarls fading into a low growl as its eyes grew heavy. The creature staggered, its limbs trembling as the calming herbs began to take effect. Kian seized the opportunity, his blade poised, but Aldara held up a hand, her voice gentle. "Wait. It's only defending its territory. If we leave now, it may not pursue us." Kian hesitated, his gaze flickering between Aldara and the creature. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the instinct to finish the battle, to ensure their safety. But after a tense moment, he nodded, stepping back and lowering his weapon. Together, they retreated, moving quietly until they were out of the wolf's territory. The creature watched them go, its gaze wary but no longer hostile, and Aldara felt a surge of relief as they disappeared into the shadows of the forest. They walked in silence for a time, the weight of the encounter settling over them. Aldara's heart was still racing, her hands trembling as the adrenaline began to fade. She glanced at Kian, expecting him to reprimand her for her interference, but to her surprise, he offered her a nod of respect. "That was well done," he said, his voice grudging but sincere. "Most would have fled or fought to the end. You found another way." Aldara felt a warmth spread through her at his words, a quiet pride mingling with her relief. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I've always believed that sometimes violence isn't the only solution. Even in the face of danger, there can be another way." Kian's expression softened, his gaze thoughtful. "Perhaps there is wisdom in that," he murmured. "But I am not accustomed to seeking alternatives. My life has taught me to act decisively, to survive by any means necessary." They continued walking, the silence between them more comfortable now, the tension eased by the shared experience. Aldara felt a new respect for Kian, a recognition of his strength and skill, but also a sense of sadness for the hardness that life had instilled in him. She wondered about his past, about the pain he carried, the burdens he bore. After a while, she spoke, her voice gentle. "You said you have your own reasons for seeking the crystal. Would you tell me about them?" Kian was silent for a moment, his gaze distant as he considered her question. When he spoke, his voice was low, filled with a weariness that echoed the shadows in his eyes. "There was a time when I had a home, a family, a place where I belonged. But that was taken from me, destroyed by forces I could not stop. Since then, I have lived alone, driven by the need to find something, anything, that could make me whole again." Aldara listened, her heart aching with empathy. She understood, in some small way, the pain of loss, the emptiness that came from being separated from those you love. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but she sensed that Kian's wounds were not easily healed. "I'm sorry," she said softly. I can't imagine what you must have gone through. But I believe that this journey, this path we're on, may offer more than we know. Perhaps it will help us both find what we're looking for. Kian nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at her. Perhaps, he murmured. But know this, Aldara. I am not one to place my trust easily. I am here because I must be, not because I seek companionship. Aldara felt a pang of sadness, but she nodded, understanding his reluctance. I understand, and I respect that. But if we are to walk this path together, then let us do so with honesty and purpose. Kian met her gaze, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. Agreed, he replied. Honesty and purpose. They continued on, their steps falling into an easy rhythm, their silence one of mutual respect. Though they still walked as individuals, their paths were beginning to align, their purpose intertwining in ways they were only beginning to understand. Chapter 3. Trials of the Unknown. Part 1. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Aldara and Kian found themselves at the edge of a vast, untamed landscape. Before them stretched a rocky expanse dotted with thorny bushes and twisted trees, their branches reaching skyward like skeletal hands. The air grew cooler, filled with the scent of damp earth and wild herbs, and Aldara felt a chill settle over her as she took in the unfamiliar terrain. We should find shelter soon, Kian said, his voice quiet but firm. The night will bring a different kind of danger. Aldara nodded, her gaze scanning the area. Though she had spent countless hours learning about plants, animals, and the land around Glendora, this place felt foreign, as if it held secrets of its own that would not be revealed easily. She could sense a tension in the air, a quiet warning that urged caution. They walked in silence for a time, the sounds of their footsteps muffled by the soft earth. The forest grew denser as they went, the undergrowth thickening until it was nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Finally, they reached a small clearing, sheltered by a ring of towering oaks, their branches creating a natural canopy overhead. This should do for the night, Kian said, setting his pack down near a fallen log. He knelt to gather kindling for a fire, his movements swift and efficient. Aldara followed suit, collecting twigs and dried leaves from the forest floor, grateful for the chance to rest after the day's journey. As they worked together in silence, Aldara found her mind drifting to the events of the day, to the wolf they had encountered, and to the glimpse she had caught of Kian's past. She felt a quiet empathy for him, a recognition of the pain he carried, even if he kept it carefully hidden. Though he had made it clear that he did not seek companionship, she couldn't help but feel that their paths had crossed for a reason. Once the fire was lit, its warmth spreading through the clearing, they sat together, the crackling flames filling the silence between them. The glow of the fire cast shadows across Kian's face, highlighting the lines of weariness and resolve etched into his features. Aldara studied him for a moment, wondering what thoughts lay behind his guarded expression. "Kian," she said softly, breaking the silence. "You said that you lost your home, your family. I can't imagine how painful that must have been." He looked at her, his gaze steady but unreadable. For a moment she thought he might ignore her, but then he nodded, a faint flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. "Yes," he replied, his voice low. "It was a long time ago." but the memory of it has never left me. Aldara felt a pang of sadness, the weight of his words settling over her. She had been fortunate to grow up in Glendora, surrounded by love and support, by a community that cared for her. She couldn't imagine the emptiness he must feel, the ache of being separated from everything he had known. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I know it's not much comfort, but I believe that you're here for a reason. That perhaps, through this journey, you'll find a new sense of belonging." Kian's gaze softened, a hint of gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Aldara. I appreciate your kindness, even if I don't entirely share your belief. My path has always been one of solitude, of survival. I am not certain that will ever change." Aldara nodded, understanding his reluctance to hope for something he believed was beyond his reach. But deep down, she felt that this journey was not just about reaching the eternal land. It was about healing, about finding a way to reconnect with the world, to trust again. As they lapsed into silence once more, the night deepened, the forest around them filled with the quiet sounds of rustling leaves and distant creatures. Aldara leaned back, letting her gaze drift upward to the canopy of stars overhead, the vast expanse of the sky filling her with a sense of peace. But just as she was beginning to relax, a sudden sharp cry pierced the night. Aldara sat up, her heart pounding as she scanned the darkness, her senses on high alert. Kian was already on his feet, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his gaze focused and intense. "What was that?" Aldara whispered, her voice barely audible. Kian shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know, but it's close." The cry came again, closer this time, a haunting wail that sent shivers down Aldara's spine. It sounded like nothing she had ever heard before, a mixture of animal and something other, something that seemed to carry a sense of malice, of hunger. Without a word, Kian motioned for her to follow, his steps silent as he moved toward the edge of the clearing. Aldara followed closely, her heart racing as they crept through the undergrowth, moving in the direction of the sound. As they reached the edge of a small ravine, they caught sight of a figure moving through the shadows, a creature that seemed to be made of darkness itself, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. It had the shape of a large cat, its eyes gleaming with an unnatural light, its movements fluid and silent as it prowled through the forest. Aldara's breath caught in her throat as she watched the creature, her mind racing. She had heard tales of shadow beasts, creatures that roamed the dark places of the world, drawn to places where magic lingered. But she had never believed them to be real, had never imagined she would see one with her own eyes. Kian's hand tightened on his sword, his gaze fixed on the creature as it moved closer. "Stay back, Aldara," he whispered, his voice low. "These beasts are dangerous, and they do not retreat easily." Aldara nodded, her pulse quickening as she watched the shadow beast, her mind racing with both fear and fascination. She knew that Kian was right, that the creature was a threat, a force that would not be swayed by words or intentions. But as she looked at it, she felt a strange connection, a sense that it was not entirely hostile, that it was searching for something, just as she was. Without thinking, she took a step forward, her movements slow and careful, her gaze focused on the creature. She could feel Kian's eyes on her, his expression one of disbelief and alarm. But she ignored him, trusting her instincts. The creature's gaze shifted to her, its eyes narrowing as it watched her approach. Aldara held her breath, her heart pounding, but she kept her movements calm, her energy centered. She could feel the crystal in her satchel, its warmth radiating through the fabric, filling her with a sense of peace. Slowly, she reached into her bag, pulling out a small bundle of sage and lavender. She held it out, her hand steady, her gaze never leaving the creature's eyes. "I mean you no harm," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "We are only passing through." The creature paused, its gaze flickering between the bundle in her hand and her face. For a moment, Aldara thought it might retreat, that her gesture of peace had been accepted. But then, with a sudden snarl, it lunged forward, its body a blur of darkness and claws. Kian reacted instantly, his blade flashing as he moved to intercept the creature, his stance strong and unyielding. The beast met his strike with a hiss, its claws raking against his sword, sending sparks flying. Aldara stepped back, her heart pounding as she watched the struggle, her mind racing with both fear and frustration. "Kian!" she called, her voice sharp with urgency. "Try to drive it toward the fire. It may fear the light." Kian nodded, his movements precise as he maneuvered the creature, using his sword to guide it toward the clearing. The beast hissed, its form shifting as it recoiled from the light, its eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and fear. As they reached the edge of the clearing, Aldara grabbed a handful of dried herbs from her satchel, tossing them into the flames. The fire flared, filling the air with a burst of light and smoke, the scent of lavender and sage thickening the air. The creature let out a low, guttural snarl, its form wavering as it backed away, its eyes filled with hatred. But as the smoke thickened, it began to retreat, its body fading into the shadows, until it was little more than a wisp of darkness. Aldara watched in silence, her heart pounding as the creature disappeared, the clearing falling into silence once more. She turned to Kian, her breath ragged, her hands shaking with the adrenaline of the encounter. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kian nodded, his gaze steady, though his expression was tinged with a hint of admiration. "That was well done. Your instincts were right. Light and smoke. It was enough to drive it away." Aldara felt a flush of pride, relief washing over her as she looked at him. "Thank you. I didn't know if it would work. I only thought that sometimes creatures of darkness are repelled by purity, by the things that remind them of life." Kian's gaze softened, a rare smile touching his lips. "You have a wisdom beyond what I expected, Aldara. I'm beginning to see that this journey may benefit from more than just swords and strength." Aldara returned his smile, a warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time since they had begun their journey, she felt a true sense of partnership, a recognition of their shared purpose, their complementary strengths. As they sat by the fire, the shadows retreating around them, Aldara felt a quiet peace settle over her. They had faced their first real trial together, had learned to trust each other, to rely on one another's instincts and strengths. And though the path ahead was still uncertain, she felt a renewed sense of hope, a belief that, together, they could overcome whatever darkness lay in wait.